Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. McLaren were fastest in Miami, Ferrari in Monaco, and on many metrics, Mercedes this past weekend here in Montreal. But what are the respective trajectories of these teams? Big upgrades on the way for McLaren, for Ferrari, fast-tracking some of their ideas to prevent a repeat of what happened this weekend in Canada. But Mercedes believe this pole position and this podium is certainly not going to be the last. They see the season with a massive positive trajectory that the data from the factory indicates. Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. As always, I would greatly appreciate it. Lots to say on this weekend. I will quickly mention this on Ferrari that despite having a shocker, they've still scored more points over the last 3 rounds than Red Bull have. Largely because Perez has not scored many at all, but not a great weekend for Ferrari. In actual fact, it probably couldn't have been any worse given their situation. The fact that the championship challenge to Max looked on, and now it doesn't look on so much anymore. Maybe there's something still in that we'll discuss over the coming minutes. One of the most remarkable stats, by the way, that Verstappen currently has, just a quick question to you guys, when do you believe the last time Max didn't win back-to-back races was? So whenever he lost, he always wins the next Grand Prix. When's the last time that didn't happen? You've got to go back all the way to July 2022 when Max lost in Britain, the Silverstone Grand Prix. He was 7th, obviously, with Sainz winning. The next weekend was in Austria. He lost to Charles Leclerc. That's the last time. Ever since that Grand Prix in Austria, if ever he's lost to Perez, to Leclerc, to Sainz, to whatever, Norris, for example, he has always won the next Grand Prix, which is an absurd statistic, and of course remains true to the present day. Speaking of Lando Norris, though, he now becomes the only driver to have scored points in every race this year. There have been plenty of DNFs around the grid. Of course, Charles Leclerc this weekend suffered one of those. So Lando's on a good path right now, and I told you guys a couple of days ago to watch out for Lando this weekend. I thought the McLaren would be pretty good here, especially if it rained and stuff like this. That's what happens, and had the race gone differently, if the safety car never happened to a Sargent, Lando probably wins this race at a respective canter given the gap that he had on Max before the safety cars arrived. Kind of crazy trivia as well, actually. This is the first time that Russell and Norris have shared a podium in Formula 1, and the first time since when they were in F2 back at 2018, which is a long time ago. Aston Martin scored a P6, P7 this weekend, which was respectable given their recent performances, but you've got to take it with a bit of a caveat, right? Aston Martin were pretty happy with their result, what they see as trajectory, on an upward direction, but the problem is Ferrari weren't there, Perez wasn't there, so does that P6, P7 really look that good in the grand scheme of things? Sure, Alonso kept Hamilton behind for a long time, but it is obviously always tricky overtaking in those intermediate conditions unless you have a mega pace advantage based on better tyre wear that it seemed like Norris had towards the end of the first stint. Perez as well did comment on this and said, this is the classic Perez. If you gave me a penny every time Perez said we when doing one of these interviews after a stinking weekend, I'd probably be a millionaire already. And this guy says, we've lost some momentum obviously in the season, but I'm also very positive that there was a long season ahead and we will get our form back. I will be working really hard in the coming. Okay, fair enough. We've got an eye in here in the coming weeks with the team to make sure that we are back to that form. So, who is we, by the way? I don't really know. Red Bull are still winning races with Max Verstappen. Is he kind of saying, oh, my engineers, my race engineer, my guys setting up my car, we're just not doing a good enough job? I feel like there's one man primarily responsible for the poor performance of the number 11 car, and it's probably the man in the cockpit, isn't it? Let's be real here. But Horner has made it quite clear as well. He's got to turn it around. His performance over the last few races hasn't been great. Am I surprised? No. I always talk about this. We said it last season. Obviously, it was a better start to the season this year for Perez. But last year, he was winning races within the first couple. He won Saudi and he won Baku. And this year he didn't, which is okay. But obviously, it's fallen off. The last 3 rounds, he scored 4 points in 3 rounds. So it can't get much worse, you would think. And even Helmut Marko, when asked the question, who's the best driver pairing, there's a couple of options out there. Lando and Oscar, certainly a very strong one. That's what Marko goes for. But of course, he definitely doesn't say Max and Checo because, right now, it is a one-man show in that Red Bull team. Lots to say on Ferrari as well. We'll discuss their upgrades over the coming minutes because lots of teams such as Mercedes, they're planning upgrades all the time. Merc have upgrades last weekend, this weekend, the weekend after that. Every single weekend, Merc are apparently bringing new parts. Ferrari thought we understand our car. It's a solid car. It's maybe not spectacular, but it's good enough. It's pretty compliant. I don't think, expected Ferrari that a weekend like Canada was actually possible. I think they probably thought their car was too consistent, too stable for that to even occur, but it did. So now they're realizing, okay, our car isn't maybe where we need it to be. We've got to accelerate and fast track these upgrade packages through. But when Ferrari bring upgrades, they should be quite substantial ones rather than gradual ones that Mercedes have been bringing effectively every weekend. Leclerc will feel like his title ambitions have kind of gone out the window this weekend, especially now we get into a stretch of European races where Max Verstappen is very much favoured to continue dominating. Before we discuss Mercedes though, we've got some drama on the Mercedes social media team. I don't know what it is about this. Why Mercedes seem so weird, like their PR angle, their social media angle. It's like when they did that apology letter to the fans or whatever it was afterwards, like Bahrain last year, where they wrote the apology letter. I forget really, but it was funny. And Merc are just kind of weird for stuff like this. Some teams, when they're letting a driver go, it doesn't really get too dramatic, and maybe it's just because Hamilton's like the most popular driver that you get all this stuff. But anyway, Mercedes tweeted out, they put it on the Instagram, heading home with our first trophy of the season. So, yeah, first trophy of the year. George Russell, of course, got the trophy. Now, there was some in the replies saying, so the Chinese sprint is not a trophy because Hamilton, of course, secured P2 in the sprint race in China, which was a trophy, but maybe not like a trophy. And Mercedes responds, their social person says, it's a medal and a plaque you receive for a top 3 in the sprint, which, okay, maybe that's true, but then people were finding this up, that Mercedes actually had tweeted out, I'm pretty sure, back earlier in the season when Hamilton secured that P2 in the sprint, bringing home the first trophy of the season. So, is it a trophy? Is it not a trophy? Like, maybe who cares? But, like, people were still going off on it, right? Because Mercedes then apologised. This is our second trophy of the year, not our first, as we mistakenly said. All sprint and Grand Prix trophies matter to us. It's also funny, right, that they kind of forgot about the sprint trophy, as in some sense did I. Just shows that, like, sprint trophy, does anyone really care about the sprints is really, I think, what this partially shows. Like, does anyone really care? Not really. But anyway, all sprint and Grand Prix trophies matter to us. Thank you for holding us to account on this mistake, they say. I'm just so confused at what Mercedes are doing. And when Hamilton leaves, I think it's going to feel like a very different team. Now, will they be still a strong team? It is still Mercedes after all, and after what felt like 2 months ago, a potentially irreparable downward spiral now feels rather different. There were rumours not long ago that Adrian Newey was looking at the Mercedes project, looking at a potential offer from Mercedes to join them for the next season, especially working on the 2026 cars, and was effectively looking at it thinking, yeah, they're too far gone. Like, it's going to take so long to put Mercedes back on the right path that it's not even worth my time. But to be fair, over the last few rounds, they brought a number of changes. The new front wing, of course, is the most obvious change they've brought, especially comparing the top here, the Imola front wing, compared to what we've seen from Monaco on Russell's car and now on both cars. A much more traditional front wing design, and it seems like this version they had at the start of the year did provide some performance benefits, but only on that earlier version of the car. Now they've made other changes to the car. This newer front wing, more, kind of, let's say, traditional front wing design is actually delivering the performance they require. And there is a feeling at Mercedes that since they've put this new front wing on, their car actually is performing very well, very consistently. Now, as I say every time we talk about Mercedes upgrades, they've said this before, and in many ways it's only really been one race. Although in Monaco they were far more competitive than they might have expected to be. And even, I think it was Andrea Stella from McLaren said, their team principal, that Mercedes were on their radar in Monaco. He said that Hamilton, maybe Russell, anyway, someone on Mercedes were doing laps during the Monaco practice sessions that were simply not possible for McLaren. And that was something that McLaren were like, wow, hang on a second, these purple sectors are pretty fierce. And then we saw the same thing happen when they went into Montreal. It was difficult to say on the Friday what was going on, like who were going to be fastest. Nobody really knew. But there is talk that this new front wing, now Mercedes have bolted it on, is effectively a eureka moment. The thing for Mercedes as well, even this season it's been the case, is that the rear of the car, despite being the major focus, right? The W15, the big focus was to get on top of the, let's say, the slidey rear ends, and it was just all over the place in terms of rear downforce. Certainly the W14, if you watched any of the onboards at trickier circuits, that was the case. That wasn't really fixed at the start of the season. Mercedes couldn't really figure out why. Their correlation wasn't working. They've made a couple of changes. They've adjusted the front wing, and now it seems like actually, you know what, they do have a more consistent car where the rear isn't just stepping out on them all the time, and they've got enough downforce to make them competitive. Maybe not Red Bull levels of downforce and pure performance, but they've at least got a car that the drivers can push and be confident is going to do what they tell it to do. And this not only unlocks pure performance, but also unlocks some sort of confidence performance. If a driver is confident that he can send in the car and it's going to stick, that's another 2/10 of a second a lap in just pure confidence. And I guess we'll see whether Hamilton can get kind of some of that confidence back. We talked yesterday on the very interesting words said by Lewis after the weekends on what he seems to believe as tyres that he's given during qualifying not being up to the same temperature as George Russell's tyres are. We talked about that yesterday in some detail, but Toto Wolff actually did say, obviously there's lots of discussion on how much Mercedes are really trying to help out Hamilton at this point, whether they're trying to, make sure Russell is well prepared as the number one for next season. But Toto says in FP3, Lewis did a lap that was out of this world. That was so quick. Then his long run was stratospheric, galactical. So there was a lot of pace. Mercedes, Hamilton, they realized there's a lot of pace in the car. Hamilton turns up to qualifying and he says, hang on a second, guys. My tyres are coming out of these blankets 2 to 3 degrees lower than usual. That's costing me a couple of tenths of a second on the laps that I'm losing to George. What's going on here? And Hamilton actually made that public, as we saw over the weekends. This was the full statement. We talked about it in some detail yesterday, but just wanted to share it again if you guys haven't heard him say this already. And maybe now Hamilton has said this publicly, his tyres will magically be coming out the tyre blankets on the right temperature next weekend. Or it's excuses and he's seeing things. I don't really know. But I don't really buy that Hamilton's magically lost it over the last couple of months, right? I mean, his practice pace is still very good on a single lap and in race runs. His race performances this season have been very good as well, probably better than Russell on average. He's just qualified significantly worse than Russell, and Hamilton doesn't even have a P6 this year in qualifying or better, which is just so rare, it's almost unfathomable. These, by the way, were those stratospheric laps that Toto Wolff is talking about. So they did a race run in FP3 where Hamilton was averaging, basically 118 low, 117 high, which was slightly faster than Max could do in the same session. And I think Max's runs were done later, so when the track was actually more gripped up. And Toto Wolff was, despite the fact that the averages are very close here and Hamilton was slightly better, the feeling I think from Mercedes was in terms of power modes, like engine modes, in terms of fuel in the car, this was like a really impressive stint of performance. So, Mercedes are confident that in actual dry running race simulations, they are on Red Bull's pace. At least they believe they were in Montreal, if not slightly faster. So all of a sudden, Mercedes think that they've made mega progress, and certainly on weekends where Red Bull aren't necessarily absolutely on it, they can take advantage. And we saw that, right? Russell put it on pole in qualifying by the most marginal possible advantage, and then could have potentially won the race. I mean, of course, he had a couple of moments. Norris overtook him and then getting outdone by Max, of course, and making a couple of mistakes. Just, we've seen this with Russell before. Great pace on the Saturday, just a bit too inconsistent on the Sunday, and when other drivers make mistakes, Max Verstappen is currently the man who's going to capitalize on that. But Mercedes say, this isn't it, right? It's not like Brazil 2022, which of course they won. There was the solo highlight of a very underwhelming season, but to be fair, in hindsight, that Mercedes season, their loads of podiums, wasn't even bad compared to what they've cooked up the last couple of years. But Mercedes is saying, yeah, we are back in the mix here, and our data indicates that. Russell actually said that it's no surprise that they'd performed better. It's not like they turned up to Montreal and were like, wow, our car's rapid here for some reason, which kind of implies the other teams have dropped the ball. Ferrari obviously dropped the ball this weekend. Red Bull said that they weren't going to be as good here as they have, they plan to be elsewhere, shall we say, given the weaknesses over the curbs and this stuff. And that changes a bit when it's wet, because in wet conditions, you're not going to take as much curb because too slippery. So didn't affect maybe the Red Bull so much in those conditions. But nonetheless, Mercedes said, we've got to see how Red Bull do in Barcelona. That is a circuit that should suit them very nicely, but of course, it's also been historically, conventionally, a good Mercedes circuit. And he says, this pace increase we've seen from us, this isn't a surprise. All the numbers back at the factory told us we're going to be finding a big chunk of performance with these upgrades. So Barcelona is very interesting. So all of a sudden, they've gone from in Imola having a consistent car that's 4 tenths off the pace to now, at least in Montreal, having a consistent car that is very, very close to the pace. And it wasn't long ago that Fred Vasseur said every weekend it's going to be Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren within a tenth and a half. Are Mercedes in that conversation? I think it's probably too early to say. But I will say that coming into this season, I was confident that James Allison and Mercedes would deliver a much better car. They didn't really at the start of the season. Bahrain was a bit of a red herring. They looked pretty good there until the race. Whereas since then it went downhill massively. Now it is quickly on the right path, and Mercedes have clearly made big gains. The issue is that McLaren haven't brought an upgrade for a couple of rounds. They've got more to come over the coming races. Mercedes have more to come, of course, as well, as to Red Bull, I imagine, in a few rounds' time in addition. But it is probably going to be very competitive at the top, and I do think there is a world where Mercedes do score more podiums and potentially more pole positions, and therefore wins are on the cards as well. And if they continue the momentum over the last 2 to 3 rounds, we could be seeing more Mercedes race victories for the first time in a very long time. The problem for them is that it's so competitive at the front of the field. You can't rely on, Ferrari not being very good, McLaren, Aston Martin, and everyone else not being very good, like they did, let's say, in 2022. Ferrari were good there, but then, of course, they started to regress from the middle of the season onwards, and Perez not performing, and therefore, it's a nice little second place, because Max is going to win, but you're going to get second, because nobody else is that good. This year, you can perform well and be 7th or 8th, just because it's so competitive at the front. And Ferrari obviously realised that. They had upgrades planned for Silverstone. They are bringing those back by 2 to 3 weeks. Maximum effort in Maranello to anticipate basically new developments for Spain, including an updated floor. So they have a big upgrade package on the way, Ferrari, and it was meant to be planned for Silverstone. They're bringing it, hopefully for them, in a couple of weeks' time at the Spanish Grand Prix. They need it, to be honest, after what's happened most recently. Spain, of course, was the scene of the derailment in some respects of the title challenge of Leclerc during that season. It certainly was a big dagger to Leclerc's title hopes during that time, and this year, if there was a world where Max were to DNF and Leclerc was to win with some big upgrades, then maybe the title fight there is still alive. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Just a couple of things to mention here I thought was kind of crazy, really. Ever since Formula 1 has started measuring lap times up to 3 decimals back in 1982, there has only ever been 2 perfect pole times, which to be fair kind of makes sense, because the chances of this, even over, hundreds of races, are still pretty rare. Spain 2016, it was a Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton that put it on pole with a 122 flat. Verstappen won, famously, after that first lap collision between Hamilton and Rosberg, and then 8 years later, a 112.0. So maybe the next time we're going to see this is going to be a 102.0, which, that would have to be a circuit like Austria, probably, but with absolutely rapid cars. So probably not the 2026 regulations. Maybe in another, 8 years or something in 2030, we might see something such as that, and whether Verstappen's still around to compete, that will be another question. I think as well, Formula 1, I believe, track the numbers down to 4 decimals. I'm pretty sure they know the lap times to 0006 or whatever. But the FIA that actually manage the timings, they only consider 3 decimals. So if it goes to 3 decimals, then, and it's the same time, then whoever set the lap time first, they get the advanced position. But actually, Formula 1, someone probably knows who actually had the faster lap between Max and between George, and it may well have been Max, who knows, but I'm not sure that information will ever actually be public. But very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.